Soaking nuts, seeds, and beans are a rich source of natural oils, vitamins, minerals, and are an excellent source of digestive enzymes. It mimics or ignites the germination process. However, they contain enzyme inhibitors too, such as phytic acid, and acts as an anti-nutrient to humans because of their ability to impact absorption of other nutrients. Enzyme inhibitors make it more difficult to digest. Because enzymes are unstable, they are locked up in the seed until needed for the plant to grow after germination. Having the enzymes locked up in this way keeps the seeds from prematurely sprouting. This unfortunately affects digestion. When soaking, it's vital to use filtered water to ensure nutritious results. Adding sea salt or an acid in soaking water is optional. It helps activate the enzymes that neutralize enzyme inhibitors. Soak item between 6 to 24 hours. This varies on the size and density of the item. Strain, rinse, and discard the soaking water 3-to-1 ratio, water to item. 1 tablespoon or 15 grams or mils of acid to 1 cup of liquid, or 240 mils of liquid. Soaking and fermenting grains partially breaks down the difficult proteins into more easily digestible components. Soak whole cracked grains as well as flour. Combine items with water and acid and leave at room temperature up to 24 hours. Not all grains contain phytase in sufficient quantities. By adding acid to the soaking water, the acid triggers the phytase to neutralize phytic acid. B vitamin content is increased. Tannins, complex sugars, gluten, and other difficult to digest substances are partially broken down into simpler components that are more readily available for absorption thanks to these friendly bacteria. Enzyme inhibitors are also deactivated through cooking. Soaking and dehydrated are referred to as activated nuts. Flax and chia seeds cannot be pre-soaked due to the gelatinous nature. Dehydrating nuts after soaking is optional but recommended, especially if being stored for later use. Dehydrating returns them to their crispy state, keeping dehydrator temperature below 115 Fahrenheit ideally, and they'll stay raw and rich with enzymes. Dehydrate for 12 to 24 hours and store in an airtight container in the freezer to extend its shelf life. Beans, also known as legumes, offers minerals, B vitamins, essential fatty acids, soluble and insoluble fiber. Cooking beans. Drain and rinse soaked beans by bringing a ratio of 3-to-1 water to bean to a boil. Simmer for 1 to 2 hours. Sprouting. Allows the item to complete its germination, the end result of which neutralizes the phytic acid and enzyme inhibitors, as well as breaks down hard to digest components. Soak first, then drain and allow to sprout at room temperature for a few days. Rinse twice a day to keep fresh and moist. When used raw, the sprouted beans offer enzymes, increased vitamin and vegetable digestibility. Even though the enzymes are lost due to cooking when you cook sprouted beans, they still offer the important benefits of being highly digestible. Raw, in salads, toss a handful of sprouted beans atop your salad greens. They add nutrition, crunch, and flavor. In dips and spreads, raw or cooked, depending on your recipe, you can use barely sprouted beans, either raw or cooked, as a substitute for cooked beans in any bean dip or spread recipe. Sprouted beans make a great addition to a soup or stew. They take only about half an hour to cook, and you'll get the benefit of beans that digest as vegetables. Sprouted flour, raw or cooked. Sprout, then dehydrate beans and grind beans into sprouted bean flour. Then use it as a substitute in recipes calling for bean flour. Greens. Stop consuming hybridized wheat. Do not eat commercially processed foods such as cakes, cookies, crackers, TV dinners, soft drinks, packaged sauce mixes. Read the labels and avoid white flour and white flour products. Humans are eating far too many carbohydrates in the form of bread, cereal, pasta, and corn is a grain, not a vegetable. Rice, potatoes, and processed cakes and snacks, with severe consequences to their health, such as heart disease, elevated cholesterol, and obesity. Everyone needs a certain amount of carbohydrates. However, the body's storage capacity for carbohydrates is limited, and an excess is stored as fat. Carbohydrates from processed foods generate a rapid rise in blood glucose sugar. To compensate for this increase, the pancreas secretes insulin into the bloodstream, which lowers the glucose. Insulin is essentially a hormone that stores excess carbohydrate calories as a fat in the thighs, abs, butt in case of famine. Even worse, high insulin suppresses two important hormones, glucagon and human growth hormone, which regulates the burning of fat and promotes muscular development. The insulin from excess carbohydrates promotes fat, then inhibits the body's ability to lose the fat. Find the right quantity of carbohydrates that provide enough fuel and energy for the day, but not so many that become stored as fat. Consume the right kind of carbohydrates to feel good and satiated after a meal. The process of sprouting whole grains changes the composition in numerous ways to make it more beneficial as a food. It increases the contents of vitamins, vitamin C, B2, B5, and B6. More importantly, especially considering how many people suffer from ingestion, it breaks down phytic acid, a mineral blocker. Present in the bran of all grains and the coating of nuts and seeds, phytic acid inhibits the body's absorption of calcium, magnesium, iron, copper, and zinc, and can neutralize digestive enzymes, resulting in digestive disorders. Sprouting breaks down the complex sugars responsible for intestinal gas and transforms a portion of the starch into sugar. It also inactivates alpha toxins, which are toxins produced by fungus and potent carcinogenics often found in grains. Chronic constipation can lead to many potentially dangerous health disorders and can also make losing weight difficult. Gluten intolerance can digest small amounts of gluten, a protein found in wheat and some other grains that form the structure of bread dough. Symptoms include abdominal pain and cramping, bloating and flatulence, bone and joint pain, chronic diarrhea, emotional disturbances such as anxiety, depression, fatigue, infertility, painful skin rash, and weight gain, or the inability to lose weight. Gluten-containing foods are wheat, semolina, spelt, kamut, wheat germ, barley, beer, rye, cereal, couscous, hydrolyzed vegetable protein, pasta, and soy sauce. Gluten-free foods are amaranth, arrowroot, bean flours, garbanzo, sorghum, buckwheat, corn, millet, quinoa, and rice are all made with starches and gums. Oats are gluten-free too, but because they are intercropped harvested, there is cross-contamination. Avoid quick or instant oats and choose instead regular oats or thick-rolled oats. Oats should be purchased in small quantities because they are whole grain and the fat content can make them susceptible to spoilage. But what if it didn't have to be so complicated? What if eating gluten-free was as simple as choosing a better wheat flour? The wheat on store shelves today is not the same wheat that humans consumed long ago. Scientifically, all wheat flours contain gluten. These include cake, pastry, all-purpose, bread, whole wheat, durum, semolina, spelt, kamut, emmer, and einkorn. Like many other foods, wheat has been optimized for the benefit of the farmers, creating bigger yields and disease-resistant crops. In 1960s, hydrolyzed bread was created. The process breaks down the gluten structure. Cake flour is completely bleached white for better liquid absorption. Great for tender, fluffy birthday cakes, but not for our health. Flour bleaching. The bleach is called alloxan. It kills the cells in the pancreas that produce insulin. Fortunately, there is an alternative than the processed gluten-free section of the grocery store. Einkorn, an unmodified ancient grain, pure form of wheat without hybridization or genetic modification. Einkorn contains 14 chromosomes and has a fragile structure. The original DNA structure remains intact and actually helps the body to digest these gluten proteins properly. Einkorn contains 3 to 4 times more beta carotene than modern wheats. That boosts immunity and helps prevent cancer and heart disease. Einkorn contains 2 times more vitamin A than modern wheats for benefit to healthy eyes, reproductive organs, and prevention of many cancers. Einkorn contains 3 to 4 times more lutein than modern wheat, which prevents macular degradation and cataracts. Einkorn contains 4 to 5 times more riboflavin than modern wheats, used by the body to create energy and is an antioxidant that slows aging. Einkorn is a hulled wheat, whereas modern wheats are not. The hull can protect the grain from stray chemical contamination and insects, making it an easier grain to grow organically. Einkorn absorbs less water than modern grain. Spelt is like this as well, but einkorn even more so. This means you're in for a stickier dough. Einkorn has less gluten and a gentle form of it, so you really won't be kneading a lot. Kneading ruins the structure of the dough, in fact. Instead, stir or do some strategic folding. Since einkorn absorbs less water, it only makes sense to reduce the water in the recipe. Coconut flour is very absorbent. Adding a bit to your dough can soak up some of the water that einkorn won't. Kamut has a sweet and nutty flavor, easily to digest, causing less gastrointestinal distress or inflammation. It lowers cholesterol and reduces inflammation compared with modern wheat. Einkorn and kamut are best as they are unaltered. Emmer was the first hybridization of wheat, being part wild wheat and part goat grass 2,000 years ago, containing 28 chromosomes. The hybridization creates the high protein. Then spelt emerged, a hybrid of emmer and goat grass, intentionally bred by farmers to keep desirable traits of emmer, and is the second hybridization and has 42 chromosomes. Over time, farmers bred spelt and emmer to create today's durum wheat, hard red spring, spelt wheat, and soft wheat. These two have 42 chromosomes and along with are the most common varieties of wheat used today. They have added 28 traits of wheat that aren't necessary for resistant to cold weather, resisting spoilage and transport, and for better rise of volume in bread. In the 1970s, over the next 5 decades, processed items increased. The intention to crossbreed or hybridize wheat was for more yield, to produce a higher yield of grain to help the starving. They didn't factor in the health of the human body. Hybridized wheat stimulates overproduction. Our cells don't want a spike. Sourdough fermentation creates a delicate structure, having a less complex protein structure. All gluten-free flours differ in their makeup of proteins, starches, and fats, with great variations in their baking functionality. They range greatly in composition, utility, and textural outcomes. Gluten-free flours can be blended with a combination of bean or legume flours, starches, or other grain-free grain flours, ground nuts, or any combination of these. Taste in gluten-free flour blends. Gluten-free baked goods rely to some degree on starches, which often leave a different taste in the finished product. Make sure to allow the batter or dough to fully hydrate. Amp up the flavoring additions with extracts, citrus zests, sweet spices, and added flavor such as vanilla bean. Add textural inclusions such as nuts, seeds, flakes, and cacao nibs to help dull any starchy taste. Using gums and gluten-free flour blends, you need ingredients that create the binding nature of gluten without using wheat. Xanthan or gura gum provides elasticity and stickiness in gluten-free doughs and batters. The ratio varies widely from 1/4 teaspoon to 1 teaspoon per cup of flour. Too much xanthan or gura gum can make the texture of your baked items too sticky or gummy. Make sure the xanthan or gura gum is blended fully into the flour mix, whether it is a commercial or homemade mix. Soaked brown rice. 2 cups of long grain brown rice to 4 cups of purified water that is warm, 4 tablespoons of acid such as raw apple cider or kombucha vinegar, kombucha, kefir, or lemon juice, 1 to 2 teaspoons of sea salt, 1 tablespoon of unrefined coconut oil or grass-fed butter or ghee, and it will yield about 6 cups. Place the water in a 4-quart stock pot. Add brown rice and acid to the pot. Stir and cover the pot and transfer to a warm place to soak overnight or for a minimum of 7 hours. After the soaking time has passed, drain the rice through a sieve into a bowl so we can capture the water and put the rice back in the pot. Measure the water and make note of the amount and then discard the soaking water. Add the same amount of fresh water as was left over from soaking back to the pot. Add salt, coconut oil to the pot and put on the stove and bring to a rolling boil, then turn down to medium-low and cover the pot and simmer for half an hour. Check to see that all the water is absorbed and the grains are fully cooked. Remove from heat and let stand for 5 to 10 minutes undisturbed. Fluff and serve or chill for later use. To reduce arsenic, you must either use white rice. The process of milling brown rice into white removes most of the arsenic, or be diligent about soaking brown rice. Proper soaking reduces arsenic by 80%. Soaking brown rice overnight in 6 parts of water to 1 part rice. Drain water and rinse before proceeding with cooking. Soak whole grain baked goods. Whole grain flours, just like whole grains, contain phytic acid and enzyme inhibitors. The grain was ground up into flour, but nothing has been done to neutralize these anti-nutrients that would inhibit mineral absorption or prevent optimal digestion. When we add a soaking step to a recipe, the soaking of the flour in an acidic liquid neutralizes some or most of the phytic acid, therefore creating baked goods with maximum nutrition. Soaking is very simple. Combine the flours and grains in a recipe with liquid, water and an acid or kombucha, and let it soak for 7 to 8 hours or overnight. It's safe to leave the soaking mixture out at room temperature during the soaking time, then carry on with the process and bake. Converting recipes to soaked. The following process works very well for recipes that have a liquid element to them. Many muffins, cakes, biscuits, pancakes, and quick breads call for an amount of liquid that is sufficient to cover the flour. Basic process for recipes that include sufficient quantities of liquids such as water, kombucha, or kefir. Change out the white flour to a whole grain flour, such as spelt, einkorn, or whole wheat pastry flour. Combine the flour and or any grains, such as rolled oats, with the liquid. If the liquid is already acidic liquid, use it as is for the soaking step. If the liquid is not already acidic, such as water or milk, add it to an acidic liquid such as raw apple cider vinegar, kombucha, kefir, buttermilk, yogurt, or lemon juice. Use 1 tablespoon of the acid for each cup of liquid. Let the mixture soak for a minimum of 7 hours, but preferably overnight or for 24 hours. Keep it in a warm or room temperature location. Soak with a biologically active acid, such as yogurt or kefir or raw apple cider vinegar or kombucha. Instead of using 1 tablespoon of lemon juice or pasteurized vinegar per cup of water in soaking, use one of the acids mentioned, as they contain beneficial organisms which may produce phytase to neutralize phytic acid. After the soaking time is passed, add all of the other ingredients, fats, leavenings, herbs, spices, flavors, sweeteners, and inclusions, and add them in the order and manner listed in the recipe as best as you can. Try to substitute more healthful ingredients if any of them are questionable. For instance, change liquid sweeteners like corn syrup to honey or maple syrup. Change dry sweeteners like white or brown sugar to unrefined. And consider lessening the amount of sweetener overall. Proceed with the recommended baking times and temperatures. For recipes without much liquid, the best way to optimize their nutrition is to use sprouted flour. Sprouted flour has already experienced a deactivation of anti-nutrients such as phytic acid and enzyme inhibitors. General cooking times are for unsoaked whole grains. Soaked whole grains usually cook in about half the time. Add more water or broth to simmer them longer. Sprouting whole grains and flour baking. Taking a grain to its fully sprouted stage allows it to perform its wonderful transformation to a young living plant, a vegetable. Sprouted whole wheat was found to have 28% more thiamine, vitamin B1, 315% more riboflavin, vitamin B2, 66% more niacin, vitamin B3, pantothenic acid, vitamin B5, 111% more biotin, 278% more folic acid, and 300% more vitamin C in compared to unsprouted whole wheat. Unsprouted seeds hold the nutrients, vitamins, and minerals in a dormant state. The germ portion of the seed contains all the genetic information to turn that seed into a fully grown plant, as well as the enzymes necessary for sprouting. When the grain cells germinates or sprouts, that genetic information ignites, and the resulting amylase activity, or enzyme action, ultimately results in plant growth. During the sprouting process, the starch molecules, or complex carbohydrates, are broken down into smaller parts referred to as simple sugars. Simple sugars are the building blocks that make up complex carbohydrates, but in a form that the body absorbs more easily. The body recognizes and readily digests simple sugars for quick energy, as opposed to starches that can be stored as fat. The grain sprouts, transforming itself into a plant, and we know the plant consists primarily of simple sugars that easily digest in the body in the form of vegetables. For flour, sprout the grains until the sprout is about 1/8 of an inch long. This should take about 1 to 2 days, depending on environmental conditions such as temperature and moisture. For making crackers and breads with the raw sprouted grain, the tails may be longer. Give the berries a final rinse, then proceed with dehydrating. Or store sprouted berries in the refrigerator for up to 1 week in an airtight container. They will continue to grow, but much more slowly. Rinse again as needed to keep fresh every 2 days. Milling sprouted grains into flour. On a grain mill finest setting, first turn on, then pour the dehydrated berries into the chute. Once all the berries are through, tap it firmly to dislodge any remaining bits of flour, and then turn off the grinder. Unplug and transfer the flour to an airtight container. Use immediately or store unused flour in the fridge or freezer. Using a high-powered blender or the Vitamix, grind no more than 2 cups of sprouted berries at a time on high for 1 minute. Transfer the flour to an airtight container. Use immediately or store unused flour in the refrigerator or freezer. Bake with sprouted flour. Sprouted flour can be used as a direct substitution for other flours in almost any recipe. Sprouted wheat flour works best for leavened baked goods or for foods that require more protein, such as bread, pizza, bagels, and pasta. Sprouted spelt or einkorn flour is well suited for more pastry-like baked goods, such as cookies, muffins, and cakes. Storage and care of whole grains. Bring home your supply, then freeze for 10 days to kill any critter, larva, or eggs. If you have a large bag, 15 pounds to 50 pounds, split it up into smaller bags. Once the 10 days are up, keep the grains in the freezer. Storage and care of cracked or rolled whole grains. Once a whole grain is physically broken, cracked, or rolled, it is more susceptible to rancidity. Most may be stored at room temperature for up to 1 month safely or up to 6 months in the freezer. And store only as much as you can use up during the storage period. Fermentation. Fermentation is an ancient form of preservation that comes with a lot of benefits. Fermented foods help maintain a healthy digestive tract, are easier to digest, offer more vitamins, particularly B vitamins and vitamin K2 that are full of good bacteria. A 1/3 cup serving can contain over 10 trillion units of bacteria. The lactic acid in fermented foods help balance the pH levels of our gut, encourage the growth of healthy bacteria, boosting the immune system. Almost any fruit can be fermented. Berries, apples, chutney, bananas, fruit juices, and sauces. Fermented fruits do not last as long as fermented vegetables in the refrigerator, but generally they will last about 4 weeks. Fermented fruits can be added to cereals, oatmeals, and smoothies. Puree them and dehydrate them at low temperatures for a probiotic fruit leather, and add them to homemade popsicles and use fermented liquid, such as flavored vinegar for salad dressings or delicious drinks. Wash, slice, and culture. Add extra water if desired. The ingredients should be below liquid and use a weight if necessary. Seal the lid and leave at room temperature for 12 to 48 hours. Fruit tends to ferment very quickly. Taste with a clean spoon and transfer to the refrigerator. Sourdough fermentation. A sourdough starter is a colony of beneficial yeast and bacteria in a batter of flour and water. Used instead of commercial yeast, which is a single isolated strain, not an ecosystem of organisms as in the starter, we keep it alive through regular feedings of flour and water. Combine sourdough starter with flour and add additional liquid if it calls for it. You give it time to sour at room temperature, 8 hours at minimum for the most health benefits. Then you add the rest of the ingredients, salt, sweeteners, etc. Shape, proof, and bake. This way, all the flour was exposed to the starter for a good amount of time. The organisms in the starter neutralize phytic acid, break down gluten, and add B vitamins, produce beneficial and flavorful acids. Making the dough. Soak flour with liquid first or use pre-soaked flour. Combine all ingredients in one bowl. Mix together sticky, not firm texture, and mix together until all ingredients are hydrated. Kneading the dough. Put dough on a clean counter or work surface. Knead for 5 minutes. The kneading motion is fold the dough towards you with both hands. Press the dough away from you with the palm of your hands. Rotate the dough 1/4 turn on the counter and repeat steps 1 through 3 for the duration of the kneading time. Avoid adding flour to the dough unless it is counter, and even though the countertop is dusted or if your hands are a little bit sticky, that is okay. You just want to have the dough come together nicely. Adjust the moisture level of the dough if needed. The dough needs to have a nice stretch so that when the yeast are giving off gases, it wants to rise and hold the structure. Dough network can accommodate that and follow along. It's teamwork. Developing the gluten won't be stretchy and strong enough to rise once shaped. To know when your dough is kneaded just right, do a window test. Take a small amount of dough and stretch it between your fingers to the point where if you lift it to the light, you can see through it. If it doesn't snap or break apart, it passes. Keep in mind the bran from the wholemeal ground will cause a tear if pulled too firmly. It is delicate and needs to stretch slowly in circular motions. Resting, bulk fermentation. As a whole mass, round the dough together uniformly and place back in a bowl that's lightly sprayed with grease and cover with plastic wrap. Rest 1.5 to 3 hours at 24 degrees Celsius. If you choose 3 hours, remove the dough from the bowl at 1.5 hours and press down or degas the dough, then reform it into a boule shape and return to the bowl. Cover to rest for the remainder time. Shaping the loaves. Divide the dough into equal parts. For a free-form loaf, tuck the dough under itself, joining the ends under the loaf. Shape into a smooth log loaf. Smear the top all over with butter or coconut oil and top with seeds if desired. If using a loaf pan, lightly grease and line it with a piece of parchment paper. Then you lay your loaf in seam side down. Or you can shape it as a round bowl and place it on a parchment lined sheet pan as well, seam side down. Final proof. Let the dough rise in a warm place to rise until size increases to 3/4 volume between 1 and 4 hours depending on room temperature. The ideal temperature is 24 degrees Celsius. Mist with water to keep from cracking as they increase volume and cover lightly with plastic wrap. Scoring and loading. Using a sharp, clean knife, slice the top in a uniform manner and load into the oven. Bake at 180 degrees Celsius to 220 degrees Celsius or 375 degrees Fahrenheit to 450 degrees Fahrenheit. Bake for 50 to 60 minutes or until the loaves are golden brown and yields a hollow sound when tapped. You can also start high and then reduce your temperature as well halfway. Transfer to a cooling rack. Smear the top with coconut oil if desired. Allow to cool for 30 minutes before cutting into the loaves. Store in an airtight container at room temperature or freeze for future use.